right. Well, if I start dozing off or anything, kind of shake me. You guys all get the same. They give me the afternoon slot. That lunch is hitting, but we're doing great. We're doing great. Very, very good to be here. I have no clicker. I should use a clicker. Nobody wants me to do charades. All right. And hey, there it is. Okay. So, let's see here. There's my little laser. I'm John. I'm a beekeeper. I'm a farmer. We do a little science. And we're talking about that science today called the 1,000 Farms Initiative. I was down in Florida, right? We just heard about a lot of oranges, didn't we? Florida's whole identity is oranges. There's an orange on the license plate, right? And isn't it interesting how food becomes a part of our identity in so many ways on a cultural level? What we don't know or often hear about is that Florida is currently at about 4% of the production of citrus that it was 20 years ago. It's dropped by 96%. It's dead. They cannot grow oranges conventionally in Florida anymore. And the remaining trees that are there each have a can of antibiotics that's injected directly into the stems. Yeah, that's the answer that they're getting, the last remaining orchards. They're calling it a disease problem, but I think if they really want to get to the root of this, they're going to have to look a little deeper in the mirror. Okay? Because they're farming in beach sand. It wasn't beach sand when they started. Okay? And diseases and other problems present themselves. Even if they solve citrus greening tomorrow, the citrus industry in Florida would still be wiped out. I was talking with one of my conventional producers, and I was explaining to him, he's like, John, the tree's roots they're anemic. They just don't know what to do anymore. And I explained to him, because I'm not a citrus producer, right? But we visited about 50 citrus producers so far in Florida, the last of them. And I said, the ones that are actually surviving, the ones that are bringing their orchards back to life, they're sharing one thing. They're growing vegetation from trunk to trunk. Okay? And he said, if that's true, then that flies in the face of everything that I'm being told by the Citrus Board and by the universities down in Florida. And I asked him, how's the advice working? And he thought about it for a second. And he said, yeah, you're right. They're not looking out for us anymore, are they? I think we all need to ask that question of how's it working? Okay? How's it working? Back in 2022, a little bit before that, maybe 21, regenerative ag was just starting to get noticed. There were farmers that were making bold claims as far as what was possible with their farms in terms of solving some of these planetary scale problems. Things like climate chaos, things like, they were growing, they were doing things that science said couldn't happen. And if what they were saying was real, then there was global food policies and tremendous financial investment that was poised to react. But why on earth would they trust a farmer? Right? Why would they? Because it's their word, right? Is what they're experiencing on that farm scalable and transferable? And I was on my farm with Christina, and the idea came up, well, maybe science has a role to play here. Maybe we could take and scale some of this stuff. And that's where 1,000 Farms was born. Because there was significant trouble, right? These problems are very real. This is down the road from my house. 2 years ago, they call it a derecho, right? Next day, they were out tilling the soil again. The dust storms, the likes of which we have not seen since the 1930s. This one wiped out several towns nearby. Fires up in Canada, right? This is all a part of this culture of land management that we're experiencing. The Pretty Prairie, town of Pretty Prairie in Kansas, huh? Where'd that go? And of course, the bees are continuing to die, right? We're losing, this last year was the worst bee die-off in human history. Yeah. As part of 1,000 Farms, I started to ask questions, of farmers. I asked them, have you experienced any of these autoimmune diseases and other, yes, likewise, allergies, asthma, anxiety, depression, mental health issues? And the farmers answered, there was 1% of them that had allergies. A quarter of them had self-reported clinical depression. And then we looked at, so this is just croppers, okay? This is the folks growing especially row crops, corn, beans, wheat, stuff. And then we looked at national averages for each of those things, right? This is like the general population. 200% increase. They have 3 times the depression rate our croppers do. They have twice the asthma rate. And then I asked those croppers whether they had experienced any Parkinson's or cancer. This is the national averages. 2,000% increase in Parkinson's in our croppers. We're killing our farmers. We're killing our farmers for corporate greed. I used to think that was okay if we just made it a little better. If we took this broken system and maybe we reduced insecticide use by once or twice. Because the farmers told me we can't grow food without agrochemicals. We have to have these. The regenerative farmers were telling me something else. I was at, let's walk this one out. Let's walk this one out a couple of moves down the chessboard. I was at Napa Green. This was some of the richest people on earth, and they own land in Napa Valley, right? Vineyards, $1 million an acre for mature vines in Napa. One of the farmers, she did a study on her farm, which was wonderful. We love to see that. She had compared for vegetation management, she had compared grazing that vegetation with mowing and glyphosate, Roundup, okay, in order to control and manage that. And she said all of them worked equally well. These were all very effective at managing the vegetation in her vineyards. But the Roundup was so much cheaper that it justifies, we probably need to go that route to save money. And then they gave me 5 minutes. And I'm like, yeah, well, to hell with that. Here we go. And I said, imagine you're at the end of your life. And you have to look your spouse in the eye. And you have to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I thought it was my job to save money. That was my metric of success. And I had heard about the impacts, but I didn't believe it, right? It never affected me. And now our grandkids are sick or not even here. And I'm sorry. Does that cut it? What's your grandkids worth? How much money? I think we're prioritizing the wrong metrics of success, the wrong currencies a lot of times. Meanwhile, amidst all of these problems, back in 2022, regenerative agriculture was starting to gain attention. Question that we had is it real? Is it scalable? Is it big enough? We thought science could help. And so we as a staff at Ecdysis had the chance to sit down and ask the question of, okay, if we needed to actually back this up, this regenerative ag thing up, what would an experiment look like? The answer is that it had to be big. Simultaneously, we had to address all food systems on the continent. We had to cross all ecoregions. We had to look at farmer-developed best management practices. So this had to be on-farm research. We had to measure simultaneously all regenerative outcomes from the system. That's big. There's a reason nobody's ever tried this before. It's crazy. If I had proposed 1,000 farms, I'd have been laughed out of a granting agency, okay? And then we had to ask who the best people for the job is. Well, we ain't the smartest, and we aren't the prettiest. We're not the richest, that's for sure. But for some reason, Ecdysis Foundation and Blue Dasher Farm attract driven, motivated, wonderful people. And so I decided, let's take this group of mavericks and make them scientists and do the most important scientific research of our generation. And that's what we did. So over the last 4 years, that team of wackos has visited 1,700 farms. We're heading to Georgia, by the way. Next year. And Virginia, we've got a whole cluster. It's already delegated. Lynette, raise your hand. Yeah. Talk to her if you need to get your farm signed up. She'll help you out. So we deploy our scientific teams from our operating regenerative farm here in eastern South Dakota, and this is where we have sent our our scientists to. Each of these dots is a farm, okay? Each of these, at least one. And they represent about 35 different cropping systems in replicate. They also represent about 10 plus livestock systems, okay? So we're really trying to, what we want is at the end of this map is going to be a map of North America's food system. Okay. Each dot falls along a continuum from very conventional to wacko regenerative, okay? And we developed a scoring system, all right, in order to assess this. This scoring system is free. It costs us about $1 million to verify, and it's the only system that's out there right now that actually has data behind it, okay, in terms of certifications and whatnot. I would argue. I would argue compellingly. So this is, in 2 minutes, I can put your farm along this continuum, and I can make pretty darn accurate predictions as far as how much carbon you got in your soils, how fast your water's going to infiltrate, how many lady beetles you have on your farm, how happy you are, whether you have Parkinson's in your family. Very, very powerful, very, very effective. It's based on 8 yes or no questions in terms of practices. And that's one of the more dangerous things about this thing, okay? Because everybody wants a box checking exercise. I did this, 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 and this, I'm regenerative. Because these particular practices were extremely representative of a management philosophy. And unless we are basing this whole movement off of that philosophy and not a series of practices, we are going to lose. It's going to become organic. All right? For livestock and ranching, it's simpler or complicated. Essentially, you guys get it. You want lots of animals, you want to move them frequently, and you want to let them rest. And then you also want to get off of the parasiticides. All right? That tends to fall into the regenerative side of this continuum. About 500 ranches is what we've been on so far. The reality is that our perception of regenerative and what is regenerative, especially within ranching systems, is contingent upon where you're sampling, the context, rainfall, light, those are huge. But there's also going to be many other things that we're going to have to factor in here. And such that we have developed one that divides along the 100th meridian the country that's pretty accurate, but feeling that's just the start of this whole process. And our understanding of what regenerative is has got to be based on outcomes. And so if you're just assigning a score without measuring what that score is attaining within your particular environment, we're not going to attain what's possible. And then on each of those dots, we have to measure all of these outcomes. Regenerative agriculture is supposed to do a lot of things. There's a lot of promises that are made. It's supposed to remedy climate change, climate chaos. It's supposed to reverse desertification. It's supposed to decrease pollution, increase money, increase farmer wellness. Nutrition, it's supposed to be producing more nutritious foods. But most, and this is what I learned over the last 4 years, first and foremost, what a regenerative farm does is it increases biodiversity. We were in upstate New York, and we were studying an Amish pasture up there. I told the farmer all of the things that we were measuring. We're going to tell you all about the carbon and how deep it goes. We're going to tell you about the water. Yeah, that's all great. And then I said, well, we're also going to count how many microbes and name them all. And he's like, whoa. And then we're also going to name all of the insects and all of the plants and all of the birds. This morning I was on a call with the IUCN, who comes up with red list species, but essentially they're the largest biodiversity organization in the world. And they're like, we've never seen a bioinventory like the one that we see with you. We've generated about 14 to 16,000 different species we have names on from our food system at this point. Okay, that's huge. One of the outcomes of this, so all of these are what regenerative agriculture is supposed to do. And now, after 1,000 farms, I'm going to tell you, does it work? Okay? So all of these different outcomes, does it actually help? Biodiversity. Number one, first and foremost. All right, this is a spider plot. It's so regenerative agriculture. Okay, so each of this is a different organismal group. Okay, I'll tell you more in a second. This is where conventional ranches are in the United States. This is based on about 200 or 300 ranches. This is the percent increase in each of the biological groups. We've got bird species, bird abundance, insects. We've got arbuscular, mycorrhizal fungi in general, all these bacterial groups. Every single one responds positively to to regenerative management. I could show you an identical graph for croplands. Okay. I've been an ecologist for a long time. When you go out, one of the worst things you can do as a scientist is try to replicate your experiment, because you go out and you make all of these assertions and then you replicate it and it didn't work the second time. And you're like, dang it. I wish I had just stopped when I was ahead of the game. In this case, I've never seen a data set where there was so much consilience amongst all of the different parameters that we're measuring. It's insane, right? And it works. So what I did, and this actually happened to me, I was like, well, I'm going to run this on just the first 150 ranches or something from the first 2 years of the study. And I'm like, I'm not sure if it's going to be enough data to really convince the most skeptical of people. So I'm going to include another 150 observations. And I was like, oh, it was almost identical. These were from new regions. These were from new, I mean, it was like, this is real. This is real. We've had to develop entirely new technologies in order to measure that, okay? So Cassandra isn't that technology, but she's working on it, right? So this is BugBox. This is artificial intelligence. What we want is we want farmers to go out there with a sweep net, be able to sweep it all up and take a picture. BugBox is our artificial intelligence system that identifies invertebrates. It's really good. It's kind of crazy good. Essentially what BugBox does is it takes that image, it pixelates it, it plucks out all of the bugs, and then it sends it through the identification algorithm. It can it can identify with about 80 to 90% accuracy several thousand species of insects at this point. We've used it to identify 1.3 million specimens. So you get an idea of why we needed to co-opt. Quite frankly, biodiversity assessments of this scale have never really been done before, in part because we don't have the taxonomic expertise to identify this stuff. Who's got time to identify 1.3 million? Well, BugBox does. We're also putting data recorders. We have about 1,000 sound files that we've recorded from each farmer ranch. And now we've developed a program that will take the bird song off of that and identify it for us, as well as all of the other biological noise. So this is a really important, when you go out to a field, when I go out to a field, I don't tell the farmers or the staff whether or not that field is regenerative or conventional, but I listen to them, right? There's more laughter. They get more work done on a regenerative farm. It's crazy. It affects us, right? When I go out to a field, I'm bombarded with information, right? My ears are hearing bird songs, and I've got insects bouncing off of me, and I'm smelling plant volatiles, and the green reflectance is hitting my eyes, and all of these senses are being triggered simultaneously, and that information goes into my brain, and it says, you're happy. And as a scientist, I have to try to come up with gizmos in order to put that into quantitative metrics so that somebody who's never experienced that farm before will believe that this is real. Okay. We're also using eDNA. So we have about 1,000 microbial communities. I think there's like 14,000 species that we've identified in those alone. Maybe 10, something like that. It's a lot. We have species level names on them, and we're going to develop an algorithm so that you guys can upload your sequence data, and then we'll process it and give it back to you for free. So stay tuned on that. Okay, so yes, regenerative agriculture increases biodiversity. Does it help to correct climate change? All right, this paper's almost published. Peer review process is a long one, especially when you're trying to overturn the apple cart. Okay, so this is a complicated graph here. What I want, this is carbon levels, total carbon in the soil. This is a soil column from conventional row crop farms, corn, wheat, soy. This is one from regenerative. Okay, so step one thing that I want you to get out of this, there's more carbon in that regenerative soil. That's important, okay? That's plants taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and putting it back down into the soil where it belongs. For a long time, we used to think that regenerative agriculture and agriculture in general, our management, only affected the top 15 centimeters of the soil because that's where most of the biological activity is. What this data shows is that all the way down 60 centimeters deep, we're getting significant increases on regenerative croplands. That's huge because that's old carbon. That's carbon that sticks around. What happens when you till this up? Whoosh, right? All that carbon goes back up. That's huge. When we extrapolate this out, what we have learned from 200 plus row crop farms, we can double that now. If we were to turn our crops over to fully regenerative practices, it would store 2 times the annual emissions that the current U.S. currently produces. When you look at any other carbon capture and storage scheme that's out there right now, the results are laughable compared to what our food system can do. We also did this on rangelands. If we were to convert rangelands over to fully regenerative, we would have 4.5 years worth of annual emissions while producing healthier beef, right? While increasing rural resilience, while reversing desertification. This is the answer to so many issues. Does it reduce pollution? Okay, on some of these farms, we actually revisited them. We went to them multiple times over several years. These are cash grain wheat producers in Washington, the Palouse area, as well as up in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and North Dakota. After the 3-year transition, 2/3 of these farmers, the regenerative ones, had eliminated all synthetic fertilizers and all herbicides. 90% of them had eliminated all insecticides and fungicides. They didn't need them anymore. Why would they pay money for something they don't need? If they went down to the coop and asked the crop advisor, what should I be putting on my fields right now? They would not be getting that answer, would they? No. We decided, because there's consequences to this, right? There's a lot of consequences. I could give you many presentations about it that would scare the crap out of you. There's a lot of consequences to that use. One of my graduate students, Dan Pachenka, just submitted one of his thesis chapters, and he looked at each of these different regenerative practices. This is what populates that score. And he looked at whether or not what relative impact they had on foliar invertebrate abundance, so bugs in the plants, right? And he also looked in the soil. We could show you many other graphs. So conclusions from that is that insecticides in wheat actually kills insects, right? So by reducing insecticide use, you reduce you increase the amount of insects out there. But if you really want to kill insects, use chemical fertilizers and herbicides. That wasn't supposed to happen, right? Nobody's regulating chemical fertilizers and their impacts on invertebrate communities, are they? Right? They're a better insecticide than insecticides are. They don't exist in a vacuum. Your decisions do not exist in a vacuum. And this is why we have prioritized within our system this component right here. It's so important. All of these artificial amendments that we think we need are making us addicts. The more you use, the more you need. And we got to get off of that because there's only one person that's winning. Who wins in a drug pusher situation, right? It ain't the addict. It's the one selling the drugs. Does it improve water cycling? Can regenerative agriculture reverse desertification? We were working in the Central Valley of California, almonds. This was our flagship project from day one of 1,000 farms. Farm 1 was an almond orchard. And what we found is that they're turning the spigots off, right? Okay, this is very similar to Florida, except a little bit earlier in the catastrophicism of the whole situation, where the Central Valley of California used to be a wetland and they made it a desert through their farming practices. Every nut, every almond that you grow requires 2 gallons of water to grow it. Every nut. That's crazy, okay? So they've drained their aquifers. They no longer have water, and they're turning the spigots off. They're telling farmers, you can't farm anymore. You're going to have to fallow something like 30% or something like that is sigma. And so what we've shown is that regenerative producers, number one, they increase their infiltration by 22-fold, something like this. I mean, the water is just suddenly, the soil is just accepting that water again. And the water holding capacity, the evapotranspiration, by getting covers onto that orchard floor, they're resetting these micro water cycles so that you're not losing it all to evaporation. Okay. What we found is that the regenerative producers are reducing water use by 50 to 70% without harming yields. That's a game changer right there. That's a game changer. Does regenerative agriculture help with nutrition? Remember those wheat fields that we studied up in Washington? And this is some of the nutritional. We've got, okay, so we're partnering with PTFI, Periodic Table of Food Initiative, as well as Ecdysis. We're running arguably one of the largest nutritional studies that's ever been done. With PTFI, we're quantifying 16,000 phytonutrients. It's nuts. I just got the database back. I don't know how the hell we're going to analyze this thing. But it's also extremely comprehensive. Of those nutrients, I think we can only put names on maybe 1,200 or something like this. It's a crazy amount. Our ability to identify the chemical profiles of plants has far exceeded our capabilities of knowing what these nutrients are or what their functions are. And so we're kind of in this weird situation of being able to generate massive quantities of data, but now we have to figure out what to do with it. Well, we did some preliminary analysis, just quick punt. Wheat on the regen, wheat had twice the protein. And out of the different micronutrients that we had initially just surveyed quickly, half of them were significantly increased. And that's what 1,000 Farms is doing right now, okay? We're generating lots and lots of information. But the nutrition world, and I think we got that from Stefan's talk a little bit this morning too, the nutrition world is kind of at a place of what is a nutritious food, right? I mean, how much copper do I need to eat? Isn't it in a ratio with how much other things are in there? It gets very complicated very quickly. But what 1,000 Farms is going to be able to do is it's going to be able to say, okay, when we decide culturally, socially, nutritionally, whatever, that this is enough of that nutrient, we can show you how to get there. All right? The production side of it and how we can produce that nutrient profile. The only way we're going to get there, and that's one of the things about regenerative ag, is we're so focused on nutrition, right, that we forget about anti-nutrients. And so if we are generating high nutrient profiles with agrochemicals, then those agrochemicals are actually reducing the bioavailable nutrients to us. And so we have to be measuring those other things in the food if we're going to get a real picture of what nutritious food is. So in this case, we've got fertilizers here and no fertilizers here. We find that potassium in wheat grain is substantially higher when you're not using fertilizers. Does it increase profit? Well, first off, regenerative corn, wheat, soy equals national averages in terms of productivity. Okay, we can feed the world using regenerative ag, assuming that we eat corn and soybeans. Conventional producers, because this was best management practices, conventional producers actually had higher yields, okay? But they paid a lot more to get them, such that the net profitability was equal between regenerative and conventional systems. Okay, that's not part of the dialogue that you often hear, is it? I can't grow regen and make money. You'll never feed the world going regenerative. I would do it as long as, but I don't think I can actually produce the food that way, right? The agronomy isn't there. What Thousand Farms shows is that those cop-outs, those are not supported by the data. And that's not to say that there aren't challenges associated with going to regen. I mean, that's farming, okay? But there are farmers that are overcoming each of those challenges within your community. That community has to be an essential part of this. We had a discussion with a sociologist, was at our field day, a couple of them actually, and we decided to focus our field day on change. What are the barriers to change? Because if those normal things that people cite as those those are not actual barriers. So what is? And what we discovered was that the chief barrier to change within regenerative agriculture is we're asking farmers to change their identity. You're asking them to change their entire culture, their worldview, their idea of what a good farmer is. That's really hard, especially when you don't have support. If you're doing this by yourself, we aren't going to get there. And so events like this that Denise and Ryan have put together are really important in bringing that community together. Okay? And that's how we're going to move this forward. We were in North Carolina. And I like North Carolina. For some reason, whenever I leave there, I always have a lot of stories. And we were working with a veteran. And last year, we visited his farm, and he had a pistol on his belt. I'm like, what's going to happen here? Are you going to shoot us? I don't understand what's going on. This year, he was so excited to visit. And he's an organic regenerative. Everything on that farm was neat as a pin, right? I mean, he was growing muscadines and blueberries, and I was eating handfuls of his blueberries, right? They're just delicious. And I asked him, I'm like, what's this like? What's this like for you? To sell your blueberries at the market. And he hadn't had to articulate it before. He hadn't had to put it into words. And he's like, it just feels so good to be able to share what I'm producing here with people, with families, and to be able to tell those families that it's safe, that there isn't a bunch of agrochemicals on these grapes or these blueberries, right? That's important right there, right? There's a lot to unpack with that story. How these veterans were using food to help heal in a lot of ways, to help reintegrate. But also that sharing food is so important. There's a farmer up in Vermont who articulated it really well. Who the hell came up with the idea that we should ever commoditize something as sacred as food? Right? We left that farm and we went over to a neighboring farm, and it was run by this artist lady, and she raised cooney pigs. And for those of you that don't know, they're small furry pigs that are adorable. And she's like, we raised them. We have piglets for sale. And she's like, these were raised in New Zealand. They were selected for in New Zealand to live in villages. They weren't fenced there. And so she took away the fences. And it was a magical place where 75 coonies, when she wanted to move them, she would feed them in different areas of the farm. What an interesting juxtaposition of two farms that were both attaining regenerative outcomes in completely different ways, right? And I think that that's part of the beauty of what regenerative agriculture is. By focusing on those outcomes, it allows us to be a reflection of our farm, and our farm to be a reflection of who we are. Because guess what? Those cash grain producers are a reflection of their farms too. I mean, I don't want to, yeah, I'll say it. The most miserable farmers that we met across the country are cash grain producers. Every year they borrow $850,000 to make $50,000. And they stopped asking the question of where that 800 grand go. They're taking on all of the risk so that these corporations can make money and mine them for everything that they're worth. That's sick. That's sick. You know, I mean, one of our metrics of success as being farmers is, did I accumulate that next quarter, right? That neighboring piece of ground. Because if I'm a good farmer, I'm growing. And Grandpa and Dad were real good at that. And now we're sitting on farms that are, 2, 5, 10,000 acres in size. And what the hell are you supposed to grow there? Except for cash grains. These farmers are trapped right now. Totally trapped. So is it real? Yeah, it is. It delivers on all of those things. 1,000 Farms shows. We're publishing into the peer-reviewed literature. But most importantly is I've experienced it. I've felt these farms. It's real. It is real. But it's not what we thought it was. It's not a box-checking exercise. This is my definition of what regenerative ag is now. Regenerative farms grow smaller and better, not bigger and simpler. Okay? That's huge. That changes. There's a lot to unpack there. That means that we need a lot more farmers on the ground. That means that we need to be changing our identities and our metrics of success. We're not... It's okay to stack enterprises, to diversify your farm rather than to accumulate more land to do the same thing that you're doing on a very, just scaling it up, right? That's a good thing. Human feet touch every acre of their farm. Another farmer introduced that one to me as a human shadow touches every acre of his farm, which I think is a little darker, but same idea, right? Same idea. We were driving by, me and one of my scientists were driving by a soybean field near his house, and he pointed at the field. He said, that field right there, John, that field was tilled. It was sprayed with herbicide. It was planted, it had a neonic and a fungicide on the seed. It had herbicide sprayed. It was had a fly-on of herbicide or fungicides and insecticides. It was harvested, it was tilled, and it was sprayed again. Human feet haven't touched that piece of ground. That ain't farming. That's mining. Right? That level of connection is so important in food production. So important. They grow food, not commodities, for their families and their communities, because family, community, and connection to the natural world are essential in the definition of regenerative ag. But first and foremost is that they celebrate life. In all of its facets, they celebrate life on their farms. What's coming next? We did it, right? Game over. I can cash in and sit and farm for a while. There's a lot of days. Now we are starting to examine what these social drivers of change are, and we're starting to think about how Ecdysis has accumulated 80 geographic clusters of farms that are doing things out there, okay? These are, how can we use this tremendous tool? We have actual relationships with these farmers. How can we use this tool and each in these groups of farms as levers for changing the country? Okay. We're going to do this through community development. So I think that this is really essential. It gets back to that identity change and being able to help change, help support farmers as they're going through this process. Number one is we're going to give the keys to the scientific kingdom over to the farmers themselves. So we will send kits of tools out to farming communities around the U.S. and beyond, and allow them to measure their own operations. We'll provide trainings, curricula, and support as much as we can in order to do that, and also an interface, such that once you submit your data or your samples, it'll take that, it'll analyze it, it'll tell you what we found, but then it'll also say, this is what other farms that are growing the same thing in your community are generating, and this is how they're getting there. So it'll help to contextualize it and hopefully be able to use that tool to bring folks together, right? Data is an equalizer. There's also other potential opportunities to bring these communities together, and Ecdysis is really starting to dig in and explore those different opportunities this winter. And then we're also looking at, okay, we've focused on where we're at with regenerative ag. Where are we going? If row cropping isn't the answer, then growing row crops a little better doesn't seem like it's going to move the needle where we need it. But how can we transition row crops over to perennial systems or to rangeland systems in order to help increase the resilience of farmers, especially in arid areas? So Ignite is going to be looking at testing our perception of regenerative agriculture throughout the world at this point. We're going to globalize what it is that we're doing. Christina and I are heading to Ireland next week to start exploring over there. We have a team headed to Puerto Rico in, 8 weeks or something like that. And then looking at these most innovative farms that we can. And then, yes, taking over the world. There we are, still crazy after all these years. And with that, maybe we could open it up for questions or dialogue or discussion. What do you think, Ryan? We're getting there.
I'm sure nobody has questions. Who's got questions?
That was excellent information. Thank you for that.
Yes.
What contexts or environments do you think are most appropriate for annual agriculture versus perennial?
Annual agriculture versus perennial. I think integrating annual with perennial is the ultimate answer. Yeah. In terms of larger scale, I think you got to have more rainfall for annual stuff. So the 100th meridian is a pretty good line. It's going further and further east. For those of you that aren't familiar with this, the transition between the tall grass prairie in North America and the short grass prairie fell along what's called the 100th meridian. And oddly enough, our grazing recommendations in terms of regenerative production also fell along that 100th meridian. It was really strongly produced. You have to change how you manage depending on rainfall. And light is the other aspect of that. But yeah, I think ultimately we really need to be thinking integration.
Great question. Who's next? Thanks.
I have a question about climate chaos and carbon sequestration.
Yeah.
Woo-hoo-hoo. So I really appreciate that you're showing that the organic system or regenerative systems have increased carbon sequestration, recycling.
Yeah.
I've also heard kind of the counter to that is that
Indeed.
the yield may not be as much, and therefore the overall effective from organics may be on par with conventional. Is that fair?
No, that's BS. So
That's what BS it is?
yes, I believe
Okay.
so. Yes.
Let's hear it.
Bare soil. Bare soil. The new dirty word. Let's see. So our data suggests that regenerative, so all of the data that I showed in terms of carbon within this were all from the same fields. And so we've got the yield data, the economic data, and the carbon data, as well as biodiversity data that shows that, number one, regen yields equates to like national averages. So it seems like we can still maintain this. What's interesting, though, within the regenerative space is that, so if you're farming conventionally, usually you produce a mean with very tiny error bars, okay? The system is really dialed in. With regenerative, you tend to produce a mean that's in a better direction, but there's really big error bars. That variability is going to be really important if you're the farmer on the ground, right? If half of them are going to be below that line and half of them are going to be way above that line, we need to figure out how to get all of the farmers above that line. And I think that that's just an inherent place of where we're at within this movement, is that farmers are developing these successful systems in different ways. And they're also motivated by much different things. So like conventional farmers, when we ask them what motivates their management, they explain to us that oftentimes economic currencies are some of the most important motivators, drivers. So profitability, land accumulation, yield, those kinds of things. And those are important to the regenerative producers too, but one of their top ones, and it's disproportionately greater, is that one of their primary motivators of regenerative is the health and mental wellness of their families. And so that's a currency, right? It's not necessarily, it's not overvalued or it's not valued very highly within a capitalistic society, but here we are, right? How's it working? So it's a good question. I think that our data refutes that, but there is room for understanding that variability still. Yes, ma'am.
All right. Corey.
For those of us that are kind of wacko regeneratives,
Yeah,
amongst a sea of conventional farmers, what can we do to what are the incremental steps maybe our conventional neighbors can take that we can encourage them to do that isn't an attack on their identity?
Yeah. Let's see. So, I don't know. Persistence. I think that's a big part of it. I mean, my neighbor to the north, every year he threatens my life. And he's a very conventional farmer, but this year he planted a cover crop on his bean field in that field, and he planted soybeans into standing cover. I'm like, whoa, and he's not talking to me about it, right? But I think he's watching everything that happens. And he'll talk to Christina all day long. He loves her, but me, yeah, whatever.
All right, we got time for a few more questions. Yeah, in the back here.
I really enjoyed your talk.
Well, thank you.
This is kind of a weird, complicated question, so give me a second to
Weird and complicated are my middle names.
Perfect. Okay. I am becoming a wacko regenerative farmer, herb farmer.
Nice.
And I'm very much in the learning process. And I'm also working on under a grant to work with area farmers on diversification, and basically including medicinal herbs as part of their crops as a way of diversifying and that sort of thing. And this is all kind of a local sort of thing.
That's awesome.
And I'm very, very interested in local and regional food systems,
Yeah,
which I think regenerative farming supports very well.
I think it does too.
How does or can regenerative farming be worked into the larger food system at a larger scale? Because one of the things that my husband and I were talking about the other night is that if we go to a totally local system, we lose a lot of the foods that we've become spoiled to.
Right.
So, like I said, that's a weird, complicated question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it is, but that's a central one, isn't it? And I think that a part of this, a little bit, is aggregation with conscience. And so knitting farming communities together again is going to give them more of a market space, but we've still got to have aggregators that are not going to be squeezing these farmers for everything they're worth. And I don't know how to do that yet. There are examples of Travis, where are you at? Everybody should talk to him. We were so impressed with what he was building out there that was not dominated by greed. How quickly it becomes that, you know? So farming communities working together again would be a huge step forward, and give a lot more opportunities. Did I effectively dodge all of the other elements of your question? Thank you. Okay.
To piggyback on her question, Jonathan, and we've talked a couple of times. I've been to South Dakota and visited your farm, and started the Farm Hero television series about 2 years ago. I've evolved from that to not only talk about farm heroes, but food heroes and healthcare heroes, all of the people that are in this room. And I think we're in the perfect storm to bring those sectors, if you will, industrial sectors together. And I think you are the perfect spokesperson to make this happen because, one, you're willing to call a spade, and you're willing to address the real issues. And I think you're also willing to go from 1,700 farms to, maybe 17 million farms or whatever, which is where we need to go. So working with Ryan and a number of other organizations that I have been working with over the last few years, before you leave, want to explore a couple of ideas because we've got some major funding that we're looking at. Don't have it in the bank yet, but it's pledged, it's committed because they realize that if we don't solve this problem, this is the foundation of what America needs to move to in the next 250 years or whatever we're going to end up with. So I'm going to connect with you before you leave, and we'll explore some ideas and a way to connect. But this is the perfect storm. We're in it, and you're telling the story about it, and thank you very much.
It is the test of our generation. It is the test of our generation. Our future, our progeny are going to look back and with critical eyes of what we've done in this moment. So now is the time, right? Now's the time.
Hey, Jonathan, can you comment on the findings from 1,000 Farms, how that compares to the findings that you and the scientific team with Peter Bick's Roots So Deep, how those kind of compare and contrast? And then maybe just share a little bit about Roots So Deep for people who aren't familiar with that, and the powerful social part of that you guys discovered when comparing that regenerative rancher to the conventional.
Yeah. So Roots So Deep was a project that we sampled 9 pairs of ranches down in the southeast, and and tried to put data behind it. Peter Bick was the filmmaker, and he put a story behind this, right? And so he kind of followed the conventional ranchers alongside this journey and showed the data and how important the data was in influencing that farmer's behavior. And so, you know, it's interesting how important science is right now in terms of helping to level the playing field, because everybody says that they want data, right? And we can provide data, but there's still this question. I mean, we're inundated with data every day, all day long, right? What's lacking is somebody that we trust, and in order to help interpret that. And yeah, within the media. I mean, who did we listen to for how many generations? I mean, does anybody remember the news anchor of your day that helped to police that information, right? I mean, we had somebody that we trusted, that we went to every night, right? The scientific community used to do that with the data too, but we got lost. We decided to do science for other scientists instead of for the farmers that we were meant to be serving. We decided we were the experts instead of servants. And scientists were never meant to be experts. We were meant to be the servants. And so, you know, we're currently faced, it's a terrifying time, because many of us, we've been hurt. We've been hurt by the current system. That system let us down. I was. And our reaction so often is to kick it down, right? Tear the walls down. And we'll have to rebuild everything from scratch. And it'll be so much better. But the reality is that it doesn't work that way. Okay? Because just because an idea is new doesn't mean it's right. And we have to apply the same level of critical thinking skills to these new ideas as we did with the old. There's a lot of pseudoscience that's coming on real strong within the regenerative movement right now. A lot of wacko, like airy-fairy alien involvement and City of Atlantis BS, right? That's not made up. I just listened to it. And people are gobbling this crap up. And I'm like, no. We need to be executing critical thinking skills, and the scientific method can help with that, okay? That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be accepting or evaluating new ideas, but it also means that there's good with the old too. And let's build off of that basis. Regenerative ag actually, I think, does that, right? You know, our great-grandfathers or grandfathers, depending on how old you are, their farming style, it failed, okay? It failed because it didn't keep the kids on the ground, right? There were good elements of it, but it was replaced by the Green Revolution and this industrialized system that we're currently in. That's failed. We're at the end of it. But there's good parts of that too. And so what regenerative agriculture does is it fuses the best of all of these different worlds into something that is a new generation. That's my soapbox. Yeah.
All right, we got maybe one more question.
Jonathan, yeah, you know, there's this institution you went to in Champaign, Urbana.
Yeah, I remember it, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember one time you said, you know, I said, Jonathan, I was in Champaign, and I said I saw your statue there. And the one I want to ask you, you know, that system's been around since Abe, and there's a lot of people that are in this room have probably been through land grants in different parts of the country. How would you change that system, when they have their over 50% going to grants, et cetera, for the overhead? How would you change that system right now? Because, it seems like, with your team, God bless you, you got the Lundgren University.
Yeah. The business model of universities has changed, right? It's become dependent on federal research funds and external sources of funds. I shouldn't just say federal research funds, because a lot of that's industry. In fact, the majority of it is industry, and that influences the questions that these scientists ask. In really bad cases, it influences the interpretation of the data that's produced. University systems still are really important parts of our development, right? I still think that they're excellent teaching opportunities and exposing people to new ideas when they're done correctly. The research model, I don't know anymore. Abraham Lincoln was a brilliant guy. Whenever I'm in D.C., I always go to the memorial there. Have you been there? Who's been to the Lincoln Memorial? Man, I don't care how busy that place is. When you go in there, it's silent. Have you noticed that? It's a magical place. One of the things he did, amidst many wonderful things, was he established the land-grant university system. He said the universities are meant to do high-risk research and not be beholden to external sources of funds, and we're going to give them the means in order to do that. Most of that land grant is now funneled into bureaucracy, and the faculty get smaller and smaller portions of it, and they have to depend on external, relationships with corporations in order to try to get that money. It's not a valid system. What is the solution? Until the land grant system remembers what its identity is, I think, small punchy organizations like Ecdysis are going to have to step in and do the job. So here we are.